In Star Wars, the Force is a powerful tool used by the Jedi and the Sith, but it's usually reserved for big showstopper moments.
Picking up and throwing huge objects, force choking, electricity.
We don't often see a small-scale application of it being used during combat, so today I'm going to give you some dirty tricks that only a Sith Lord would use. First, let's talk about footwork manipulation. This is probably the easiest way to trip up your opponent.
Ha!
Haha. So one of my favorite ideas for a dirty trick the Sith would use is pinning the foot. If we're here and he thrusts at me and he sees this coming, he tries to retreat, I pin the foot, causing him to stumble, allowing me to get in and make the kill. In that same vein, we can also sweep the leg. If he's standing there, maybe he's about to advance, and I pull the leg forward, causing him to lose his footwork. I can do this while he's retreating, while he's advancing, at any given time. Another dirty trick in the same vein is moving the foot in the wrong direction. Ideally, he wants his feet to be going in a linear fashion unless he's moving sideways. So if I were to manipulate his foot to go one way or the other way, it would be super hard for him to keep his footwork in balance. If he's coming at me and I slip that leg, it gives me a good chance to move offline and get him when his back is exposed. I can also assist my own footwork by manipulating his body. For instance, a lunge. If I were to lunge at him from here, I can't hit him and he knows it, so he might think he's safe. But if I initiate my lunge while also pulling him towards me, all of a sudden, I can reach and he's in a bad spot. But what if I want to get even dirtier with my tricks? Well, if my opponent rocks up with their stylish hood and we're about to fight and I pull their hood over their eyes, now he's blind and he's having a bad day. Additionally, if I want to blind him a little bit more permanently, I might employ the old pocket sand routine, but now using the Force to target the eyes even more specifically before I kill my foe. And hey, it doesn't have to be sand. What if it was glass or chili powder or something absolutely terrible? I'm a Sith. I would absolutely do that. Nah, let's just stick with sand. It's rough, it's coarse, it gets everywhere. There's another technique that I think has a lot of promise. It actually shows up in the new films, but it's done in the stupidest way possible. Somebody uses the Force to stop a lightsaber. And this is cool, but if the Force is pushing it that way, it's super easy for me to roll off and hit somewhere else. So instead of having this continuous push in one direction, why don't we do something a little bit more focused? If my opponent's thrusting at me, hand parry with the Force to open up a line of attack, just like you would with a rapier, making sure that it doesn't hit your hand because it's a lightsaber, but that's what the Force is for.
Now, some of you probably thought of some really cool ideas that we didn't touch on here. And here are a few that we wanted to do, but ultimately decided wouldn't work.
So we talked about using the Force to amplify our pre-existing moves, like doing Force lunge or Force speed into a flesh or something like that. And the reason we thought that wouldn't work is because the other person also has the Force and they can also move that fast and do those things. So it would kind of equal out or cancel out. Maybe it would work, but also we don't have the Force and we couldn't actually show that without doing a lot of editing, and I didn't want to do that, so we didn't do that. So another thing that happens in the films is people do throw the lightsabers, and that's already there. I think it's kind of underutilized to be super effective. I know in some of the books they have it where they've got multiple swords swinging around. It kind of gets to the point though where it's a little bit OP.
Yeah, plus in theory, if you throw yours, they can use the Force to control your own sword too.
Yeah, because
it's still risky.
So whose Force is stronger, right? Like they can stop that one in the air. It gets into a whole thing. And another thing to talk about here is there is some lore that states that you wouldn't necessarily be able to affect your opponent's body with the Force because they have like a Force shield around them. However, we do see people in the films using the Force on other people, but it's usually the whole body, like pushing them back. So I'm not sure this is necessarily as much of a problem, and I think a pinpointed attack would be harder for you to repel than something that was a general Force blast. So these would be really fun and cool things to put into Star Wars sword fights that would make things a little bit spicier, a little bit zestier. And I think this is a really clever and unique way to use the Force as opposed to just, ha!
In that same vein, we didn't really want to go too much into controlling your opponent's lightsaber, either on the hilt or the blade.
We thought about having it come into a bind and one person controlling it so the other person can get out, and we thought about two things. One-handed swords don't bind as much, so this wouldn't be super helpful. In every instance of the Force being used in the films, there is some sort of accompanying hand move almost always, and I think that's fair. Lore, like they can do stuff without moving their hands, but I think I like it when they have to do something with their hands. It makes it less OP. If you can just be like force everything all the time, always, why would you not do that.
Plus, if I try and force a bind here, like in theory, my sword is stuck too, so I don't gain anything.
If I've got 2 hands and you've got 1,
don't gain
and you bind me,
anything.
oh good, I've bound,
Like,
right?
you know.
So that's one thing. Then obviously, like, oh, I'm gonna turn your lightsaber on and off. They actually talked about that in the Darth Bane trilogy, and that's that thing about building the Force shield around yourself. It's not like it's old school lore.
It's so gamey.
Yeah. There's reasons they didn't do certain things in the films because it wouldn't have been fun to watch. The things that we're proposing would be fun to watch. Therefore, they're okay. It really does come down to that, right? If something would make the story worse, don't do that. Being able to turn off your opponent's lightsaber makes the story worse because it's the cheapest, stupidest thing. If something would make the story better, pinning the foot, you can get out of that. That's not an overpowered move if it's used well, and maybe you have to get them off their game. Like you're playing 4D chess with the blade and they start to ignore their body and you use the foot. You can make that interesting.
And that's when using a force push could even make sense. If he pins my foot, I can push off the ground to get out of it.
There you go.
There's counterplay.
So our ideas are better than the dumb ideas like turning the blade on and off. So let us know if you liked our Dirty Sith Force tricks and if you want to see more stuff like this. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and throw us $1 on Patreon if you like our stuff.
And leave your own Dirty Sith tricks in the comments.
A big thanks to all of our supporters on Patreon and YouTube memberships.
If you want to support us, this is the best way to do it.
This means we don't have to rely on the fickle whims of the algorithm and AdSense, and we can keep bringing you awesome content without fearing starving. So if you want to support us, consider joining for $1 a month.